The pressure inside the Forrester manse had reached a position no bone could have prognosticated, the kind of suffocating, electric silence that clung to every wall and echoed through every corridor, as though the house itself knew commodity terrible was about to unfold. And at the center of it all stood Eric Forrester, a man formerly defined by his wisdom, compassion, and steady hand, now unraveling under the crushing weight of treason, remorse, and a fury so dark it frightened indeed him, his eyes cold and distant as he goggled out over the sprawling estate that had been his pride for decades, brooding words that would change everything. "I'll kill her." Words that were no way meant to be spoken audibly, yet formally released, could no way be taken back, and it was Ridge who heard them first, stepping into the study just in time to catch the nipping protestation, his heart stopping as he realized that his father, the man he'd always looked up to, was standing on the edge of commodity unrecoverable, commodity that could destroy not just their family, but everything they had erected together. And Ridge, generally so collected and commanding, felt a rare swell of fear as he tried to reuse what he'd just heard, demanding answers, his voice sharp and critical. But Eric didn't respond incontinently, rather letting the silence stretch between them like a tense line ready to snap, until eventually he turned, his expression hardened by a storm of feelings that had been brewing for far too long, revealing a verity that would shake Ridge to his core, that the woman at the center of Eric's rage was none other than someone deeply entangled in their lives, someone whose conduct had set off a chain response of pain, treason, and consequences that could no longer be contained. And as Eric began to explain, his voice pulsing with both wrathfulness and heartache, Ridge set up himself torn between unbelief and dread, because this wasn't just about vengeance. It was about a breaking point, the moment when a man who had always chosen remission was eventually choosing commodity differently entirely, commodity darker, and away. Brooke Logan tasted that commodity was terribly wrong before she indeed knew the details, her suspicion pulling her toward the manse like an unnoticeable force, her heart racing as she arrived and set up Ridge floundering to calm his father, the air thick with pressure. And when Brooke learned what Eric had said, she didn't flinch in fear the way Ridge anticipated her to. Rather, she stood still, absorbing the graveness of the situation with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes, because Brooke, further than anyone, understood what it meant to be pushed beyond your limits, to feel like the world had taken too much from you. And as Ridge contended with her to help him talk sense into Eric, to remind him of who he was and what he stood for, Brooke surprised him in a way that would shoot shockwaves through their formerly fragile dynamic. She didn't incontinently condemn Eric's words. She didn't rush to shut him down. Rather, she stepped near to Eric, her voice calm but establishment as she told him she understood his pain, that she knew how deeply he'd been hurt, and that occasionally, the desire for justice could feel indistinguishable from the desire for vengeance. And Ridge couldn't believe what he was hearing, his frustration growing as he indicted Brooke of enabling commodity dangerous, of standing by while Eric entwined into commodity unrecognizable. But Brooke held her ground, averring that dismissing Eric's passions outright would only push him further into darkness, that what he demanded wasn't combination, but understanding, and this created a rift between Ridge and Brooke that neither of them had anticipated, because for the first time, they were on contrary sides of a moral line that felt insolvable to navigate. And as the hours passed, the situation only grew more unpredictable, Eric's wrathfulness enhancing. As new exposures came to light, secrets that had been buried for times suddenly surfacing and adding energy to an formerly raging fire, making it clear that this wasn't a transitory moment of rage, but the capstone of times of undetermined pain and treason. And Ridge, hopeless to help his father from doing commodity he could no way undo, began to take drastic measures, reaching out to those closest to Eric, hoping that someone, anyone, could break through to him. But each attempt sounded to boomerang, pushing Eric further into insulation, his resoluteness hardening with every perceived treason. And Brooke, caught in the middle, set up herself walking a dangerous line, trying to support Eric without blinking his intentions, trying to keep Ridge from losing faith in her while also staying true to her belief that people merited to have their pain conceded, indeed when it led them to dark places. And the emotional stakes continued to rise as the identity of the woman Eric was targeting came inarguable, transferring shockwaves through the entire Forrester circle, because this wasn't just about one man's wrathfulness presently, it was about the implicit destruction of multiple lives, the unraveling of connections that had been precisely rebuilt over time, and the possibility that one unrecoverable act could change everything ever. And as competitions erupted, alliances shifted, and long-held grievances resurfaced, the question brewing over everyone came insolvable to ignore. Would Eric actually go through with it? Would he cross that final line and come someone none of them could fate? Or would someone be suitable to reach him in time, to pull him back from the point before it was too late? And in the midst of all this chaos, Brooke's decision to stand by Eric continued to shoot ripples through every commerce, forcing everyone to rethink their comprehensions of her, of Eric, and of the fragile balance between justice and revenge. And as the story lofted toward a breaking point, one thing came clear. Nothing would ever be the same again, because once those words had been spoken, once that darkness had been unleashed, there was no going back, only forward into whatever consequences awaited them all. The storm that had begun with Eric's nipping protestation refused to settle, rather growing more unpredictable with each passing hour, as though fate itself had decided that the Forrester family would be pushed to its absolute limit. And inside the manse, the air felt heavier than ever, every breath carrying the weight of what might be next, while Eric Forrester paced relentlessly across the study, his studies twisting into a dangerous preoccupation that he could no longer control, replaying every treason, every taradiddle, every moment that had led him to this point, until the line between justice and revenge had fully blurred. And indeed, though part of him still honored how far he'd fallen, that voice was getting quieter, drowned out by the roar of wrathfulness that had taken hold of him, and Ridge watched helplessly as his father slipped further down, his attempts to reason with him growing more hopeless and less effective, each discussion ending in frustration, each argument pushing Eric deeper into insulation, and it scarified Ridge in a way nothing differently ever had, because this wasn't just a family conflict. This was the implicit loss of the man he'd always believed would hold them together no matter what. And yet now, Eric sounded to be the one tearing everything piecemeal, while Brooke remained at his side, her presence both a comfort and a source of pressure, because indeed, as she spoke vocally, prompting Eric to decelerate down, to suppose about the consequences, there was an inarguable part of her that refused to abandon him, that refused to treat him like a monster when she could see the pain driving him. And that unvarying support continued to produce disunion between her and Ridge, who couldn't understand how she could stand so close to commodities so dangerous without drawing a firm line, without saying enough, and their arguments came sharper, more particular, dredging up old injuries and undetermined issues that had nothing to do with the current extremity, yet ever felt thick from it, as though everything they had been through together was being tested all over again. And in the midst of this emotional chaos, the verity about the woman at the center of Eric's rage began to spread beyond the walls of the manse, reaching others who had their own stakes in the situation, their own reasons to sweat what Eric might do, and soon, the pressure extended far beyond a single menage, getting a ripple effect that hovered to gulf everyone connected to the Forresters, because this wasn't just about one act of vengeance, it was about the consequences that would follow, the legal ramifications, the emotional fallout, the unrecoverable damage that would be done if Eric crossed that line. And as further people came apprehensive of the peril, sweats to intermediate boosted, with some choosing to defy Eric directly, hoping to shock him back to reality, while others worked behind the scenes, trying to produce a safety net in case the worst actually happened. But Eric's mindset had shifted in a way that made him decreasingly resistant to outside influence. Every attempt to stop him feeling like another treason, another reason to harden his resoluteness, and yet, beneath that toughened surface, there were cracks beginning to form, moments when his expression faltered, when mistrustfulness flitted in his eyes, when the enormity of what he was meaning sounded to break through. Indeed, if only for an alternate, and Brooke noticed those moments, holding on to them as evidence that Eric wasn't fully lost, that there was still a part of him that could be reached, and she used those moments to push back gently, to remind him of who he'd been, of the heritage he'd erected, of the people who still believed in him. Indeed now, indeed after everything, and for brief cases, it sounded to work, his wrathfulness softening just enough to produce a splinter of stopgap, but also commodity would spark him again, a memory, a piece of information, a careless comment, and the cycle would start each over, pulling him back into that dark place where nothing differently signified except the need to make effects right in the only way he could now imagine. And Ridge, seeing this pattern reprise, began to realize that time was running out, that they couldn't calculate on words alone to stop Eric, that they might have to take further drastic action, commodity that felt unbelievable but decreasingly necessary, and this consummation forced him into a painful position, one where he had to choose between guarding his father and guarding everyone differently, and the weight of that choice was nearly unsupportable, because no matter what he decided, there would be consequences, there would be damage that couldn't be undone, and as the situation escalated toward a breaking point, the question of fidelity came more complicated than ever, with Brooke standing forcefully by Eric, believing that abandoning him would only push him further into darkness, while Ridge grappled with the possibility that true fidelity might mean stopping him by any means necessary, indeed if it meant betraying his trust, and the emotional stakes reached a fever pitch when a direct battle eventually took place between Eric and the woman he'd sworn to destroy, a moment that everyone had stressed yet hoped to help, and as they stood face to face, the pressure was nearly unsupportable, every implied word hanging in the air, every once grievance reflected in their eyes, and for a split second, it sounded such like time itself had broke, as though the macrocosm was giving Eric one last chance to choose a different path, to step back from the edge and reclaim the man he used to be. And in that moment, everything hung in the balance, not just one life, but the future of an entire family, the heritage of a man who had formerly been a pillar of strength and integrity, and whether that heritage would be destroyed or ever rescued depended entirely on what Eric chose to do next, a choice that would echo far beyond that single moment, shaping the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could yet completely comprehend. Even after that cataclysmal battle, the Forrester manse remained a grease-paint cask of implied pressures, every hallway echoing with the ghosts of once miscalculations, the weight of remorse pressing down on everyone outside, and Eric's presence sounded nearly suffocating, a brewing shadow over all who dared approach him. Ridge, meanwhile, could slightly suppose straight. Every moment he spent near his father felt like walking a tightrope above a hole that could swallow them all. He'd always been the middleman, the bone, who kept family conflicts from twisting out of control, but now, his usual confidence faltered as he realized the inflexibility of the storm they were facing. Each regard at Eric was a memorial that the man he'd known all his life could evaporate entirely beneath layers of rage and preoccupation, and that intimidating possibility eroded at Ridge relentlessly. Brooke, standing beside Eric, felt the same pressure, but interpreted it else. To her, Eric's darkness wasn't entirely evil. It was an incarnation of deep, abiding pain and treason. She had seen the depths of Eric's love, his fidelity, and his desire to cover the people he watched about, and she clung to the stopgap that nearly under all this wrathfulness, that man still was. When she reached out to Eric, touching his arm gently, her voice calm yet fostering, it was both a plea and a warning. "I know what you're feeling," she rumored, her eyes locked onto his, "but you cannot let this consume you. We can face this together, but only if you step back before it's too late." Eric's eyes softened shortly, a flicker of vulnerability cutting through the storm of rage. Ridge noticed it and wanted to seize that moment, to reason with his father, to remind him that revenge would not repair the fractures in their family, it would only destroy everything they loved. But before Ridge could speak, a new disclosure landed like a blast. Someone from Eric's history, someone whose treason had remained retired until now, had returned to Los Angeles, a figure whose reappearance stirred recollections, regrets, and fresh fury. The woman who had burned Eric's darkest studies wasn't acting alone. There were abettors, cohorts whose intentions were murky, and whose presence hovered to push Eric over the edge entirely. Ridge tried to keep his fear under control, but inside, he felt his mind unraveling. He allowed. Of the Forrester heritage, the fashion conglomerate, the family ties, the delicate network of trust that had been erected over decades. All of it hung in the balance. He felt an unsupportable weight on his shoulders, the pressure of knowing that one wrong move, one inadequately chosen word, could cock his father into a place from which there would be no return. And yet, he couldn't abandon Eric. Despite the fear, despite the peril, the bond of family remained, fragile but unbroken. Meanwhile, Brooke's influence over Eric continued to grow. Her capability to speak to the man beneath the wrathfulness, the Eric who had loved, defended, and forgiven numerous times before, created a pressure between stopgap and fear. Ridge, ever the pragmatist, viewed it as dangerous, believing that any indulgence of Eric's darker impulses might buoy him, might justify the studies he'd raised, might give him a reason to act on them. But Brooke saw it else. She believed that understanding, compassion, and presence were the only tools important enough to pull Eric back from the point. As the hours turned into an uneasy night, exchanges shifted to strategy. Who could intermediate? Who could help disaster if Eric's rage escalated further? The answers were limited, and the stakes were advanced than ever. Ridge considered calling an external help, legal authorities, private security, but dithered. Such a move might provoke Eric, might make him feel cornered, might accelerate his darkest intentions. The irony was bitter. Guarding Eric might bear limiting his freedom, yet restraining him could also be the catalyst that would unleash the veritably peril they sought to help. In the quietest hours of the night, the manse sounded to hold its breath. Every creak of a floorboard, every rumored discussion, every step came a precursor of what might come. Eric, restless and undetermined, wandered the halls, occasionally speaking audibly, occasionally murmuring to himself, while Brooke followed him with steady, measured tolerance. Ridge observed from the murk, calculating, anticipating, and hoping desperately that he could act in time. Also, just as the pressure sounded unsupportable, Eric came face to face again with the woman who had sparked his fury. This time, the battle was no longer about words. It was about presence, about choices, about control. Eric's eyes burned, his fists gripped, and for a moment, it sounded that the worst might come to pass. But Brooke's calm voice broke through, a tether pulling him back from the edge. "You're better than this, Eric. I know you are. Step back, flash back who you are, not what they made you feel." For a twinkle, Eric set. The rage in his casket warred with the echoes of the life he'd erected, the family he'd cherished, the love that Brooke had no way wavered in immolation. Ridge, watching the internal battle play out, felt a hint of stopgap, but also a moping dread. He knew the moment could evaporate in a moment, that Eric's decision would define not just that night, but the heritage of everyone under the Forrester name. And as the first shafts of dawn began to pierce the horizon, the manse held its collaborative breath, staying for the choice that would either save them or shatter everything ever.